When Cape Codders think whales, they think Stormy Mayo. As 2024 marks Stormy's transition into retirement, they will have to think again.
No one has made more contributions to the conservation of right whales here in Massachusetts than Dr. Stormy Mayo.
Well, I think people will remember Stormy as a homegrown boy from Provincetown, but who went off and had a really outstanding education at Dartmouth and then at University of Miami for his PhD, but came back and put that to work.
So where did it all begin?
In my family, there was very little encouragement to know what you're going to do when you grow up, typical of my father. But he encouraged me, because it was his interest, to work with the ocean, to work particularly with fish, which was his primary interest. And though I didn't plan it or even drive for it, I sidestepped lots of other possible directions, courses in college, and ended up in biology and eventually in the study of the ocean.
Well, I met Stormy in the late 1970s. Not having really been here before, I perused the local newspaper and saw that these three scientists were offering a field study in the local environment: Stormy Mayo, Barbara Mayo, and Dr. Graham Geis. So I signed up and I was one of his first students, their first students. It must have been about 1974, 75 maybe. I was just out of grad school, and we had a 5-day course walking around the beaches and dunes of Provincetown with Stormy explaining everything as a biologist and Graham explaining everything as a geologist, and Barbara correcting both of them.
And we did that, and that really was the kernel that started the Center for Coastal Studies. I was working on the whale watch boats to make a little bit of extra money, and I saw this extraordinary access to whales while Graham Geis and Barbara Mayo both were working in the harbor doing things, and I started working with them, teaching that course, and it grew up. We had the audacity to call the beginning institution in 1975 the Center for Coastal Studies. It was actually 3 people.
3 employees grew to over 40, and Stormy Mayo leaves a thriving center in his wake.
Stormy has really mastered an understanding of the local use of these waters by right whales. His work to understand when they arrive, when they leave, what they feed on, what parts of the water column they're using, has really translated into management and policy that has reduced the risk of entanglement or vessel collision here in Massachusetts.
His knowledge of marine science, the ocean around us, not only is extensive as a scientist, but it's also local knowledge. I mean, he knows from having grown up in this area, watched the changes happen to the ocean, watched the changes happen to the seashore, and he understands the rhythm from a local perspective. So he's steeped in local knowledge. He augments that with really solid scientific credentials, and that combination has made him one of the most important people we've had in ocean and coastal conservation in this part of the world.
His contributions to the world of marine science often took place in Cape Cod Bay. What is it about Stormy Mayo that singles him out? An early colleague of Stormy's, Dr. Randy Olson, gets to the heart of it.
It's the humanity of him, and it's what we're losing in our society today. You know, we've created entire generations of these scientists who've been allowed to bypass their humanities training, and they're very one-dimensional, and that's not a good thing. And especially the science and technology world now, you know, is being led by these people that are missing this human dynamic. And that's what Stormy and Barbara were. They were so human. They were great storytellers, great communicators. And this, of course, is what I work with. And the science world can't understand why they're doing such a bad job with communication. Well, you put together an entire generation that you forgot to teach them the basics of humanity so they can communicate.
I remember well reaching deeply into one of those cuts to find out how much blubber she had, which would really tell us whether she was fit enough to migrate. And seeing blood come out of this huge gash where the ropes had sawed into her body from her swimming. And I've often said that it was that moment, really only then, that I could relate to her as a feeling, as a thinking, and in a sense as a sensitive organism, much like ourselves.
He was always known as the local expert on right whales, and because there was some ongoing litigation with the state by a nonprofit group, we were seeking solutions, and we contacted Stormy to see if some of our opportunistic sightings could be used by him in his research to get a better appreciation for when and where right whales were present.
I went on the board for Center for Coastal Studies probably 28 years ago. Peter Borelli was the CEO, and Stormy, of course, was in the prime of his career as a scientist then. I think Stormy's most significant contribution is that he really became one with the world that we live in here on Cape Cod and around Cape Cod. He is part of the marine biology, the marine environment.
A pioneer in the development of whale disentanglement techniques, Mayo's early work helped to establish the Marine Animal Entanglement Response Program, now a leader in global whale rescue efforts.
Disentanglement is really a very small part of the many things that we do at the center, but we think it's a most important one, a direct way of helping the animals we study.
I think it's most likely the fact that he was probably the first person who really realized that right whales were using Cape Cod Bay as a major feeding habitat during the winter. I don't think people really knew that. We don't know how long that had been happening before Stormy identified some of the first right whales in the bay. He will say that other people mentioned to him something was going on and he went out and found them, but then he pursued it and he continued it, and it's because of Stormy's great focus on that particular species that we started up our aerial surveillance program to identify the population. Now we're complementing that with our habitat studies so we know what they're feeding on, and so we've been really, because of Stormy's initial focus and his continuing work, we've been at the center of right whale conservation and protection from day one. Well, with regard to the question of losing Stormy, I'm not going to let us lose Stormy. So as long as I'm around and out, I can tell you, as long as everybody else who's been involved in the center, we're going to keep a connection to Stormy. We know where he lives. It's only a few miles from the center. He's not going anywhere as far as I know. And so we will certainly have a working, collaborative relationship with Stormy. He'll step down, and he deserves, after all these years, 47 years of the Center for Coastal Studies, to have a break from the day-to-day management and fundraising and science. But he has a couple of special projects in mind, and we would like to help him make sure he can participate as he feels comfortable.
I think You know, I think this is the right time because we have an exceptional person to take my position. Someone who will likely bring the right whale work to a new level with new studies, new approaches. In some ways, the work that I've done with right whales is just the beginning.
He doesn't stop. He has an incredible amount of energy. He brings a lot of energy and a lot of successful execution to just about everything he does.
One of the questions I always think about with Stormy is, you know, what would the whales think of Stormy if they could meet him? Obviously, there'd be a lot of gratitude, but they'd think, that's one hell of an interesting guy. The best indication of someone's excellence and the job that they do in life is they leave the ability to be backfilled behind them. So I think that if this was a question of, gee, how's the center going to do without Stormy, then Stormy would not have done the magnificent job that he's done.
He is Provincetown. I mean, he is Cape Cod Bay embodied, and even though he won't be active on their payroll and on their work schedule, I'm sure he'll be available for the organization and for us to consult. He'll have a little bit more time for dahlias, of course, but he also has his sailboat that he would like to sail more. And so I wish him a long, healthy retirement. I do.
I don't look backward or forward, I look present. Everybody has their own way of encouraging themselves. I do well with the present, and that's part of the reason why I don't have one thing. I don't have one plan for the future. I don't even have a plan for the future, and I don't have one thing in the past. The sun just came out. That's enough for me.
He'll come up with something. He's Stormy. He'll come up with something. I bet you it's in nature too.